James's heart skipped as coffee splashed across the counter, his eyes meeting Michael's in a crowded Chicago cafe. A quick smile, a shared laugh, and a number exchanged sparked something dangerous, a connection James hadn't felt in years. At 32, he'd buried his truth to survive a world that judged. Would he risk everything for this stranger's warmth, or keep hiding in the shadows? James, a graphic designer, had mastered the art of blending in. His days were spent in a sleek office, crafting logos for clients while dodging questions about his personal life. Growing up in a small Illinois town, he'd learned early to keep his identity locked away. At 18, he'd come out to his parents, only to face their silence, a rejection that still stung. Chicago offered a fresh start, but even here he kept his guard up, wary of co-workers' whispers and the city's unspoken rules. That afternoon, the cafe bustled with the hum of conversation and the clink of cups. Michael, a 28-year-old barista, moved with an easy confidence, his quick wit cutting through the noise. When James's order fumbled, coffee spilling over the edge of the cup, Michael's laugh broke the tension. "Rough day?" he asked, sliding a napkin across. Their fingers brushed, and James felt a jolt, a pull he couldn't ignore. They exchanged numbers before James could second-guess himself, his pulse racing as he left the cafe. That night, James stared at his phone, Michael's name glowing on the screen. A simple text. "Hey, enjoyed meeting you. Free tomorrow?" Felt like a lifeline. He typed a reply, then deleted it, his mind flashing to the last time he'd let someone close. A college fling had ended in betrayal when his partner outed him to mutual friends, leaving James exposed and alone. But Michael's message lingered, tempting him to take a chance. They met the next evening by Lake Michigan, the city's skyline glittering in the distance. The air was crisp, carrying the promise of autumn. Michael spoke with a fire James envied, sharing stories of his travels and dreams of opening his own cafe. "I want a place where people can be themselves," Michael said, his voice steady. James nodded, his throat tight. He wanted that too, but the weight of his past, his family's rejection, the fear of being seen, kept him silent. Their meetings became a quiet routine. Late-night texts turned into stolen moments, a walk through Millennium Park, a shared bench in a hidden corner of Grant Park. Each encounter chipped away at James's walls. Michael's openness was magnetic, his fearlessness a stark contrast to James's caution. But with every touch, a hand grazing his, a fleeting glance, James felt the risk grow. He caught himself scanning the crowds, paranoid about familiar faces from work. One evening, as they sat on a pier overlooking the lake, Michael's tone shifted. "Why do you always look over your shoulder?" he asked, his gaze piercing. James froze, the question cutting too close. He wanted to explain, the years of hiding, the co-worker who'd once mocked a gay colleague, the fear of losing his job. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he deflected, muttering about a long day. Michael's eyes narrowed, sensing the dodge, but he let it go. The tension simmered. Michael pushed for more, dinners in public, a weekend away. But James hesitated. The memory of his father's voice, cold and final, echoed, "You're no son of mine." At work, rumors about a co-worker's lifestyle had already sparked hushed conversations. If anyone saw him with Michael, the whispers would turn to him. Yet denying Michael felt like betraying himself. Their next meeting was different. Michael arrived late, his usual spark dimmed. "I can't keep doing this," he said, his voice low. "Hiding who I am. It's not me." James's chest tightened. He wanted to promise change, to say he'd be braver, but fear held him back. As Michael walked away, the distance between them felt like a chasm. James stood alone by the lake, the city's lights blurring, knowing he'd pushed away the one person who made him feel alive. The Chicago wind bit at James's skin as he stood outside Michael's cafe, his breath visible in the early November chill. Their last meeting by the lake had left a wound. Michael's words, "I can't keep hiding," echoing in his mind. James wanted to bridge the gap, but fear clung to him like damp air. Tonight he'd try to explain to keep Michael from slipping away. But as he pushed open the door, a co-worker's familiar laugh stopped him cold. They'd been seen. James ducked into the shadows, heart pounding. He'd spotted Sarah, a colleague, at a nearby table, her eyes catching his just as he'd reached for Michael's hand days ago in Grant Park. The moment had been fleeting, but the risk was real. At work, whispers about inappropriate behavior already floated, fueled by a manager who frowned on anything unconventional. James had spent years crafting a careful persona, professional, private, invisible. One wrong move could unravel it all. He texted Michael, suggesting a quieter spot, a secluded pier by Lake Michigan. When Michael arrived, his usual warmth was tempered by frustration. "You're pulling away again," he said, his voice sharp against the lapping waves. James shifted, the weight of his secret pressing harder. "It's not you," he managed. "It's work. My past. You don't know what it's like to lose everything." Michael's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Then tell me." James hesitated, memories flooding back. At 18, his father had cut him off after he came out, his mother silent beside him. Friends from his small town had vanished, their rejection a quiet betrayal. Chicago was supposed to be different, but the fear followed. "If my office finds out, I'm done," James said. "They'll freeze me out. I've seen it happen." Michael stepped closer, his voice low. "I get it. But I'm not built for secrets. I want us. Out there. Real." The words stung. James wanted that too, but the risk felt like a blade at his throat. They walked along the pier, the city's glow distant. Michael pushed, suggesting a public dinner, a step toward openness. James's stomach nodded. "Not yet," he said, his voice barely audible. Michael stopped, his silence heavy. "How long is not yet?" he asked. James had no answer. Days later, the tension spilled over at work. Sarah cornered James by the coffee machine, her tone casual but pointed. "Saw you at the park. You and that guy, you're close, huh?" Her smile wasn't cruel, but it carried a warning. James mumbled a vague reply, his pulse racing. By lunch, he overheard co-workers whispering, their glances sharp. The office felt like a minefield, every step a potential explosion. That night, James met Michael at a hidden rooftop spot Michael knew, the city sprawling below. Michael's mood was lighter, but his words cut deep. "I told a friend about us," he admitted. James froze, panic surging. "You what?" Michael shrugged, defiant. "I'm tired of lying. I want people to know I'm with you." James's voice cracked. "You can't just decide that for me." The argument flared, their voices low but fierce. Michael stormed off, leaving James alone under the stars, his world tilting. James's phone buzzed as he stood on a crowded Chicago street, the city's pulse doing little to drown out his dread. Michael's last words on the rooftop, "I'm tired of lying," had left a rift between them. Days of unanswered texts followed, each silence a weight on James's chest. He'd pushed Michael away, too afraid to step out of the shadows. Tonight he'd try to mend things, but a gnawing fear told him it was too late. He headed to a small bar where Michael often hung out, hoping to catch him after his shift. The place was alive with chatter, but James's focus narrowed as he scanned the crowd. Then he saw him, Michael, leaning close to another man at the bar, their laughter intimate, their hands brushing. The sight hit James like a punch. His knees weakened, and he gripped the edge of a table to steady himself. Michael hadn't seen him yet, but the truth was clear. He'd sought solace elsewhere. James stepped outside, the cold air biting as he fought to breathe. He texted Michael, fingers trembling, "We need to talk, now." Minutes later, Michael emerged, his expression a mix of guilt and defiance. "What's this about?" he asked, though his eyes betrayed he knew. "I saw you," James said, his voice low but sharp. "With him. How could you?" Michael looked away, the silence deafening. "You kept pushing me away," he finally said. "I felt invisible." The words cut deeper than James expected. He'd been so consumed by his own fears, workplace rumors, his family's rejection, that he hadn't seen Michael's pain. "I was trying to protect us," James said, his voice breaking. Michael shook his head. "You were protecting yourself. I needed you to choose me, not hide me." The accusation stung, unearthing James's insecurities. He'd hidden his truth for years, but at what cost? Had he driven Michael to this? They stood in the alley, the city's hum fading as their voices rose. Michael admitted he'd met the other man weeks ago, a fleeting connection born of frustration. "It didn't mean anything," he said, but the words felt hollow. James's mind raced, his father's cold dismissal, the friends who'd turned away after he came out. Now Michael, the one person who'd made him feel alive, had betrayed him. "I thought you were different," James whispered, turning away. Back at his apartment, James sat in the dark, replaying every moment. The office rumors had grown louder since Sarah's comment, colleagues casting sidelong glances. He'd overheard a manager mutter about keeping things professional, the words laced with judgment. Michael's betrayal felt like a mirror, reflecting James's own failure to be honest. With him, with himself. He wanted to hate Michael, but the ache in his chest told a different story. He'd pushed Michael away, too scared to face the world's scrutiny. By morning, James knew he couldn't keep running. Michael's actions hurt, but they exposed a truth. Hiding his identity was tearing him apart. He needed to confront his fears, not just for Michael, but for himself. As the sun rose over Chicago, James made a choice. He'd face the consequences, whatever they were, to reclaim his life. James walked through Chicago's morning fog, the city's hum muted as his thoughts churned. Michael's betrayal at the bar had cracked something open, a raw awareness that hiding his truth was no longer sustainable. At 32, he'd spent years dodging judgment, but the cost was clear. A fractured relationship and a life half-lived. He needed to face himself, even if it meant risking everything. Work was a gauntlet. The rumors sparked by Sarah's comment had spread, and James felt eyes on him during meetings. A co-worker's offhand remark about keeping personal lives private landed like a warning. He kept his head down, but the weight of secrecy pressed harder. That evening, Sarah caught him alone by the printer. "You okay?" she asked, her tone softer than before. "I know how it feels to be watched." Her words hinted at her own struggles, and for the first time James felt a flicker of allyship. Her encouragement lingered. On a whim, James searched for local LGBTQ+ support groups, landing on one meeting that night in a community center. He hesitated at the door, heart racing, but stepped inside. The room buzzed with voices, people sharing stories of rejection, resilience, and hope. A man in his 40s spoke of losing his family, but finding strength in community. A young woman described coming out at work, facing whispers but gaining respect. James listened, their words unraveling his fear. When it was his turn, he spoke haltingly about Michael, the betrayal, and his years of hiding. The group's nods and quiet support felt like a lifeline. Driving home, James replayed his past. At 18, his father's voice had seared into him. "You're no son of mine." A childhood friend had ghosted him after he came out, their bond erased by fear. Those wounds had shaped his caution, but the group's stories showed him another path. Hiding hadn't protected him. It had isolated him. He needed to live authentically, not just for Michael, but for himself. The next day, James took a step. He approached Sarah at work, voice steady. "You were right to ask. I'm gay. I've been hiding it." Her smile was immediate. "I figured. You've got my support." The conversation was brief but freeing, a crack in the wall he'd built. At lunch, he overheard the usual whispers, but they stung less. He wasn't invisible anymore. That evening, James texted Michael, not to rekindle things, but to understand. "Can we talk?" he wrote. Michael agreed, suggesting a quiet park bench by the lake. When they met, Michael's eyes were heavy with regret. "I messed up," he said. "I was angry, feeling like you didn't want me." James nodded, seeing his own role in their unraveling. "I was scared," he admitted. "But I'm done hiding. I need to be me." Michael's gaze softened, a faint smile breaking through. "I'm glad." They parted without promises, but James felt lighter. He wasn't ready to forgive fully, but he understood Michael's pain. The city's skyline glowed as he walked away, a quiet resolve settling in. He'd face the world as himself, no matter the cost. James stood at the edge of Grant Park, the Chicago skyline shimmering under a June sunset. Months had passed since his talk with Michael by the lake, a moment that had shifted his world. Coming out to Sarah at work had been his first step toward living openly, but the whispers from colleagues lingered, a reminder of the cost. Tonight, he'd take a bigger leap, joining the city's Pride event, a public declaration of who he was. His heart raced, but for the first time, fear didn't hold him back. The park buzzed with energy, music, laughter, and rainbow flags weaving through the crowd. James had never been to Pride, always watching from a distance, afraid of being seen. Now, he walked among strangers who felt like allies, their shared defiance a quiet strength. Sarah had insisted on coming, her presence a steady anchor. "You belong here," she said, nudging him toward a group from the community center he'd joined. Their warm greetings eased his nerves, grounding him in a sense of belonging. At work, things hadn't been easy. After coming out, James faced cold shoulders from some colleagues, their sidelong glances sharper than before. His manager had called him in, citing office dynamics, but James held firm, refusing to shrink back. To his surprise, others stepped up. Co-workers he barely knew offered support, and Sarah rallied quietly behind him. The rumors faded, replaced by a fragile acceptance. Each small victory chipped away at the walls he'd built since his father's rejection at 18. James had reached out to Michael one last time, not for romance but for closure. They met at the cafe where it all began, the air heavy with memory. Michael's voice was soft, his regret clear. "I was scared too," he admitted. "I pushed you, because I didn't know how to wait." James nodded, seeing their shared flaws, his caution, Michael's impatience. "We both messed up," James said, "but I'm learning to be me." They parted as friends, a weight lifted, the past no longer a chain. As pride unfolded, James felt the city's pulse sync with his own. He joined a march through the streets, surrounded by voices chanting for freedom. A stranger handed him a small rainbow pin, and he fastened it to his jacket, a quiet act of courage. The fear of judgment, his family's, his co-workers, still lingered, but it no longer defined him. He thought of the community center, the stories of resilience that had carried him here. He wasn't alone anymore. As the sun dipped below the skyline, James stood with Sarah, watching the crowd. "I didn't think I'd ever do this," he said, his voice steady. She smiled. "You're stronger than you know." In that moment, James felt free, not just from secrecy, but from the shame he'd carried for years. The future was uncertain, but he was ready to face it, to build a life where love didn't need to hide. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell. More stories are coming that will move you, inspire you, and challenge the way you see your own journey. Every story matters, and each one brings us closer to who we are meant to become.